Senator Kennedy. Senator Warner is recognized from his office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate you holding this hearing. I think it's critically important. Many of my colleagues' questions I agree with. I want to take it in a slightly different direction, and particularly from my role as chairman of the Intelligence Committee. I think I want to talk about how we can limit foreign technology in the United States, because I do think the technology competition, particularly with China, over the next balance of this century is going to be where our futures are going to be decided. And my feeling right now is we have taken kind of a whack-a-mole approach to this issue. A number of years back on the Intel Committee, we identified the problem with the Russian software company Kaspersky. We dealt with that. We identified the challenges with Huawei, and we've spent public monies to kind of rip and replace. We've seen an activity using the Secretary of Commerce's tools to go after some of the chip companies in China on the entities list. And now many of us are concerned about the notion of communication firms like TikTok and both the potential of taking American data or being a massively used propaganda tool for the Communist Party of China. So, Mr. Wolf, I know this is an area of your expertise. Where do we have limitations? And as we think about restraints on federal tech or foreign technologies, wouldn't it be better to have a broad, holistic approach that could take on any of these technology challenges? Could you address this?
Sure, thank you. Happy to help. What you're referring to are the information communication technology supply chain regulations that were published in final form at the end of the Trump administration, and the current Commerce Department has continued and has given responsibility to my former bureau, the Bureau of Industry and Security. And I think your bill or others, in order to give congressional voice and authority and mandate and resources to implementing that, is really quite critical. Right now, the authority is under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, and it would be, in my view, best that Congress speak directly and clearly as to it. The authority closes a gap, addresses a gap between export controls, which is outbound focused, CFIUS, which is inbound when there is an investment, and what you're referring to is to the extent that there are transactions or activities involving the communication supply stream. It's still really in its earliest stages of creating a whole new bureau and activity and policy and regulations. The key difficulty is how you scope it, because the number of transactions that would be affected as drafted are in the millions, and trying to create a licensing structure or a CFIUS-like safe harbor approach would require the creation of a whole new department. And there's also the general issue of ensuring that any type of regulatory authority, if the discretion is so broad that it will create perpetual clouds over the use and acquisition of electronics and other information equipment in the United States. So the principle and the policy are terrific. It closes the gap. Congress should speak, but it's about resources, scoping, and a clear mandate, particularly, by the way, with respect to protecting personal data, for which there isn't a clear regulatory structure, and export controls and CFIUS and sanctions really don't have the tools to do that. So, and it's a long way to order.
I appreciate this, and I appreciate I've obviously been working on a bipartisan approach that will hopefully roll out shortly. But in some of this terminology from my colleagues, IEPA is a bill that goes back to the 60s, broadly gives the president some authorities, but it has been modified by the so-called Berman amendments in the late 80s, which particularly around communication technologies put some limits on IEPA. Mr. Trump's ICTS executive order, again, has some challenges because it falls under this IEPA/Berman framework. I think to get at an entity like TikTok or other communication entities where there may be a higher standard, where we don't have the kind of traditional entity list designation, or even we've seen like with the FCC, when they went after Huawei, that's a single entity, but it's not a comprehensive interagency approach. So, Mr. Wolf, I know we're down to the last 30 seconds. Do you have any other, I just wanted for my colleagues to point out, our current structure just doesn't in a holistic way particularly take on these technologies that are in the communication space. And I have grave concerns with the level of investment that China is making. That the challenge of who will be successful will be who controls communication technologies, who controls satellites, who controls artificial intelligence, quantum computing. And I don't believe, unless we continue the current Whac-A-Mole approach, that we've got the tools at hand. And I hope to work with all my colleagues on how we might more comprehensively address this. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Warren.